everybody has a very busy life, but these are very important changes that are coming into effect that, of course, affect your largest assets. For those of you that I haven't had the privilege to meet, my name's Daniel Dicisi. I'm one of the co-directors at Noel Jones Group. And on behalf of the group, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending. I know that there's a little bit of daunting news going about the place, and people turn on the lights for current affair, and that can maybe make you lose sleep at night, but don't worry, we're here to work through it with you. Our PMs have certainly been working very hard throughout the course of the last month or two to ensure that they're well trained and well versed on these changes that are coming into effect. Although there are 132 changes and we can't offer you guidance on all of those tonight, we will have time at the end for questions. You can either type them in or you're welcome to put your hand up, and Christy Barber, our operations manager, who's put the event together tonight for us and assists us in so many ways behind the scenes. You don't often get to see Christy. Will indicate who's next for the question. And you will have time for that at the end. If we do run out of time, we'll also provide an email address that you can then shoot through any questions you may have. We'll collate all of those questions, be able to offer you this video, this particular webinar video, and answer any questions you have. Now, you're not here tonight to hear me speak, but we're very lucky to have Catherine Kimpton online with us tonight. To give you a bit of a background on Catherine, she has over 20 years experience in business as a licensed agent, a fully qualified trainer and assessor. She's been helping us to train our staff. She has experience in recruitment, of course, real estate, business sales, management, marketing. And I guess this evening the idea is for Catherine to run you through the most pertinent issues that are going to present themselves in the short term, and give you a bit of an understanding of the most prevalent changes that are coming to the Residential Tenancies Act as of the 28th, being yesterday. So that's enough from me. I thank you again for joining through, and I'll hand it over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, and good evening to everybody. As you're all very well aware now, there are a significant number of changes that have come into play as of today for the Residential Tenancies Act. And the purpose of this evening, of course, is to take you through some of these and to explain how they're going to impact you as property owners, how they will change slightly the way in which your property managers will manage your properties, and also to let you know what to expect from your tenants, or renters as they're now called. I have put together a small PowerPoint slide just to give you some highlights. This is a presentation that can be provided to you, I believe, through Noel Jones after the webinar, but it will just I help to guide you as I speak as to what's happening and why. So just give me a second. Hopefully we'll be able to bring up this for you so that you can see what we are looking at. Okay, so as of today, and today is the day, we have had a number of changes throughout the Act. And what has happened here is the Act has changed and also the regulations. I think as a bit of background, it's quite important to understand why these changes have occurred. I've had a lot of people coming to me saying, well, why so many changes and why now? In short, what the government are looking to do is place stronger legislation around the requirements for rental properties. This is regardless of the age, the condition, or the rent that's being paid. And they want to set a legal minimum requirement for rental standard here in Victoria to make sure that we have acceptable living standards for everybody in our community. For those rental owners like yourselves who are already looking after your properties, you know that they're a major asset for you, and therefore you do maintain them and keep them up to standard. You've got great tenants in play and you're employing great property managers to ensure that your assets are protected. There's not going to be a significant amount of impact to you, because a number of things that we talk about, I believe, are going to be things you're already doing. There are going to be some procedural changes. These probably won't affect you as the actual owner of the property. This is more about your property management team. So as Daniel just said, Noel Jones have been working in the background for the last 6 or 7 months, knowing that these changes are coming through, and therefore have put in policy and procedure to ensure that as of today, that they are able to migrate to the new procedures with regard to notices to vacate, collection of bonds, returns of bonds, those types of things that you probably, as the property owner, don't see on a day-to-day basis. So the procedural changes will be done by your property managers and are very likely not to affect you going forward. However, before we get talking about the changes and what that means, the first thing I want to highlight is there's actually been a change in terminology. So going forward, whereas before you were referred to as a landlord, now under the legislation on all of your documentation, you'll now be known as a residential rental provider, or RRP, as we are shortening it to in the industry. So this is a terminology change, and you will see on your agreements when you're referred to from your property managers, when there's conversations, you will now be that residential rental provider. Your tenants are no longer tenants, they are now renters. So it's just a slight shift in terminology, and you're used to having a tenancy agreement, but again, this is going to be a residential rental agreement. So very much now putting the onus on the word rent or rental, as opposed to that landlord and tenant environment that we've worked in for so many years. So the change is positive going forward to make sure we have a uniformed rental standard for everybody. And to make sure that all landlords, regardless of whether they're self-managed or working through an agency, are doing the right thing and providing the right standards for the renter. See, already it's hard to get around the terminology. So these happened as of today. And as Daniel just said, there are 132 changes, which is an awful lot of change on one day. Quite overwhelming for the property management industry as a whole to think about having all these changes to cope with on one day. But as I said, we've had 6 or 7 months leading up to this. We're well versed in what's got to happen. And behind the scenes, already we've put mechanisms in place to ensure that the compliance is going to be there going forward. Now, the new changes will apply to all new rental agreements. So if you currently have a tenant in your property, most of these changes are not going to affect you until such times as your tenant leaves and you put a new tenant in, or if they're on a fixed tenancy agreement, they run into a periodic. So if they get to the end of those 12 months, they stay in the property and continue forward on that periodic month-to-month basis, then the new requirements will also kick in at that point. But effectively, most of the changes are about new tenancies going forward, not about the historical tenancies you have now and changing them. So it's quite important to understand what will happen and why. So if we take it as a sort of a benchmark, new tenancies going forward. So for those of you who are coming towards the end of a tenancy, so you know that the lease is due to come either for renewal or your tenant's given notice and they're moving out, the pivotal time for you is going to be now getting your property ready under the new standards for when your new renter goes in. So we're going to look at what those changes are, how you manage them, and your responsibility as the rental provider, and of course what Noel Jones is going to do for you to ensure that it's run smoothly and effectively with those changes. Minimal fuss to you, and also of course downtime for your asset. So the legal responsibilities change not only for you, but also for your also for your property manager. And they are going to cover a number of things. And I've highlighted here, as I said before, 132 changes, but there will be a number of changes in each category. So what I've done is just highlighted some of the things which are going to affect you. And then we're going to drill down into the ones which seem to be the ones that are causing most problems or questions so far for those rental providers that I've been speaking to and other agencies. So the changes will cover areas such as disclosure of information. So now going into a rental agreement, you are going to have to disclose information to your renter before they sign that rental agreement. And I'll highlight what those disclosures look like in a moment. But there's going to be a requirement to give information up front so your renter can fully understand the property, how it transacts, and some history around that property before they decide to take up that tenancy agreement and move in. I should say rental agreement. Very hard to get around this terminology. When you've been doing it for so many years with one terminology, a different one is quite difficult to remember. I will push forward for it. There is also information that you cannot now request from your renters. So we have mandated areas that we're not allowed to go to and ask for. So there's information that previously your property manager has been able to request from the renter, but now going forward, it's going to be minimalised as to what questions we can ask and what history. And again, your property manager will discuss this with you. They've already got the mechanisms in place. We've already got the documents drawn up as to what we can collect and what we can't. And we will still be able to pre-qual the tenant, the renter, moving in. So we're making sure we've got the right renter coming into your property for you. But there are certain things now that mandated under law we will not be able to ask. Most of that is about rental history in terms of bond dispute and possible dispute with a rental provider. The big ticket item, or what appears to be the big ticket item for most people at the moment, is this minimum standards. So we do have some mandated under legislation minimum standards that every single rental property must apply to. Again, for most of you, you're keeping your properties well maintained and they're up to code, so there won't be a lot of change. But the reality is, you have an asset that's an income producing asset. It's going to be a cost of doing business for you to ensure that your property meets those minimum standards and you can continue to offer that to the market and have a renter in there. I am going to break down the minimum standards because they seem to be the thing, as I said, that most people are concerned about. Does my property meet standard? Does it meet code? If not, what does that mean? Running on from those minimum standards, we're looking at regular checks for gas, electrical appliances, and also your smoke detectors. So there's a requirement now to have some mandated testing done on a 2-yearly basis with regard to your gas, electrical and smoke alarms. Again, this is all positioned around safety of the property and ensuring that those checks have been done and they've been documented. Going forward, your renters are going to be able to request this information and you're going to need to produce that. And again, I know in the background that Noel Jones will be doing a lot of work with third-party providers to ensure that we can outsource this, to get companies in to do these checks for you, to make sure that you have the compliance certificates and that your insurance was then covered accordingly because your checks have been done by a qualified electrician, gas fitter, etc. So again, those safety checks we'll look at in a little bit more detail in a moment. Modifications by the renter without consent. Some of you may have seen this on a current affair and on other news programs where they are telling you that the renter is going to have more ability to make minor modifications to the property. The reality is that's the case, but they are minor. And again, I'm going to list those in a moment so you understand what that looks like. But I think it's really important to understand, as the property owner, if your renter makes minor modifications, which they can do under the Act without consent, some of them will require consent and you will be asked about that. And you must not reasonably withhold that consent. But whatever changes your renter makes over the period of the tenancy, at the end, they have to return the property to you in the same condition as they were given it. So as an example, if your tenant decides to put a picture hook up to hang something within the property, they are able to do that as a minor modification without your consent. But when we get to the end of the tenancy, they need to make good. So that picture hook needs to come off, the wall needs to be filled, paint needs to be touched up, and your property needs to be returned to you in the condition under which the renter took it. So there are some safeguards for you as rental providers. Pets in properties, already you've probably been exposed to this. This has been running in for a while now. Again, as that rental provider, you are not going to be able to refuse or reasonably refuse somebody having a pet within the property. Again, there are parameters around this. And as Daniel said, I would love to be able to go into detail for every one of these 132 changes, but your time is precious and I'm sure you don't want to be here for the next 4 or 5 hours while I go into them in detail. If I can give you the high level information, you can of course talk to your property managers at Noel Jones and they will talk you through what it means to give consent or to withhold consent and why and how that works. But as a base, you need to understand, I guess, now as that rental provider, that it's going to be a lot more difficult to prevent somebody from having a pet within that rental property. Again, if they do have a pet within the property, any damage that is caused, they are required under law to rectify before that property comes back to you at the end of the tenancy agreement. When we go back to the modifications, so the minimum standards and the checks, there's also going to be a requirement around energy efficient appliances. So as your appliances wear out, and unfortunately you're going to need to replace them, as you know, cost of doing business, owning an asset. So as your appliances may break down, cannot be repaired and need to be replaced, there will be a requirement for you to replace them with an energy efficient standard requirement for each appliance that goes back into that rental property. Notice periods for ending tenancies have changed slightly. And again, your property manager will advise you on this, the notice periods and what they are going to look like. We still have the majority of them in there. However, we have lost the 120-day no reason notice. So you can no longer serve 120-day no reason. to end a tenancy, but we do still have a number of different ways of ending a tenancy, and just some of those timeframes have changed slightly. There is also going to be a requirement now if you decide to sell your rental property. So if you are looking to de-invest your portfolio at any time, there is going to be a requirement for you as the rental provider to notify your renter of your intention to sell the property and give them notice for that. And probably the other big area that's changed quite significantly is that if you do decide to sell that rental property, when you do your open for inspections, there is going to be a requirement to compensate your renter financially. So in the past, it has always been a negotiation between yourself as the owner of the property and the renter who is in there. And very often you would give some kind of discount because you know that the quiet enjoyment is no longer there for them and that people are wanting to come through the property maybe once or twice a week. But the major change in the legislation for you now is it's a legal requirement to compensate them as opposed to a negotiation or an optional extra. Again, the amount of compensation is directly annexed to the amount of rental that you are charging on the property. So there's a minimum threshold whereby a flat fee is applied. Above that threshold, there will be increments of increase with regard to the compensation amount. At a base level, again, just so you get a feeling for this, $30 per inspection, maximum inspection time of 1 hour is the minimum amount that will be paid. And that will be on properties that are rented at a threshold of $450 a week or less. Once you start getting over $450 a week, it will be an amount equal to half a day's rental. So again, your property managers will work with you and help you to calculate what that looks like. And of course, that is a requirement under law for you to pay that or to compensate the renter accordingly. And my assumption is that will be an adjustment through the rent with your property manager. It will end up that your rent has money on filing credit because of your compensations. And then the last one probably I want to highlight is the payment and return of bond. Again, this process has changed for your property managers in how they lodge those bonds, the amount of bond that we can take, again, annexed to the rental. And of course, when we get to the end of the tenancy, how the bond is returned. This is something that you want to discuss with your property managers going forward. It will be seamless for you because they will take care of it at the other end. However, it may change on some of those higher level rentals, the amount of bond that you can now take. So I would suggest that that's a conversation to have with your property manager moving forward. So how does it affect you? Basically, as of today, everything that has changed is now a legal requirement. Therefore, you must implement it. It's not an optional extra. It's not something whereby you can decide whether or not you wish to go forward with it. It is something mandated under law. As I said before, most of you will probably be doing the majority of these things already because you do invest time and money into your assets to ensure that they are an ascending asset and that you're going to have something great at the end of the portfolio to sell if you wish to do so. We also know that good rental properties, of course, well maintained, better calibre of renter, higher rent, high yield. So that all makes sense. Your Noel Jones property managers are looking at your individual properties and basically doing an audit to compare where your property sits now, what the new requirements are, and whether or not there are any gaps. So they're going to sort of do a gap analysis, and then they'll inform you what needs to be done to get your property up to the minimum standards required under this new legislation. So that is a conversation that each of your property managers will be having with you, and then I'll let you know what needs to be done to ensure that you are compliant. Again, as I stated at the beginning, Noel Jones have been working in the background for a number of months on this, not only getting their property management teams educated and understanding the new changes, but also making sure that they've got great relationships in place with third-party providers to ensure that they can offer you a cost-effective and professional solution for any of the services required, such as those electrical checks or those gas checks. So highly advisable that you have that discussion with them. Obviously, you have the option to source your own providers, but I would suggest, having spoken to a number of the providers and a number of different agencies, that your property management team, your Noel Jones team, have secured a really great wholesale rate for you. So by allowing them to effectively channel this for you and recommend these providers, not only is it going to save you time, but it's also going to save you money. And again, a conversation to have with your team, and they will provide you additional information. Okay, so we're now just going to break down into some of these requirements in a little bit more detail so you can better understand some of the main things that are going to impact you basically as of tomorrow. So making sure you fully understand what it means now going forward. So if you are signing a residential rental agreement, or what we would used to call the old tenancy agreement, as of today going forward, so if your rent is going in tomorrow, you have a property on the market at the moment for which your team is securing you a new renter, the disclosure requirement will apply to you. This is in a standardised form, which again, Noel Jones will provide to you, but you now have a duty to disclose certain information to your renter before they enter into the rental agreement, so they can understand a little bit more about the property and make some decisions based on quantifiable information prior to signing onto the tenancy agreement, or rental agreement it is now called. So run through these quite quickly with you. Again, we can have questions at the end, and I'm happy to expand upon all of these, but I just want to make sure that we tick off on the key items. So the disclosure requirements around information in respect to embedded network providers. So you need to let them know who those providers are, the contact details for that provider, and any fees and tariffs that might apply. So things like your NBN, or if you're, of course, in apartments, if you've got a provider with regard to your telecommunications coming in, it's embedded and runs through the whole of the apartment block. You need to have a little bit more information with your renter to understand the fees, contact, etc., that is involved around that. You need to let your renter know that if your premises or any common property, so again, if you're on strata title, part of an owner's corporation, you need to advise whether or not your premises or the common property has been the location of a homicide in the previous 5 years. So if you know this, if you're aware of something, you have to disclose. Obviously, what you don't know, you don't know, but it would be a criminal offence to withhold information. So you are going to have to indicate on that and sign off on it. You also need to let the renter know in the disclosure requirements whether or not your premises comply with those minimum rental standards that I've talked about. And the next couple of slides are going to be around the minimum standards, because that's really probably the biggest change that we've had thus far. So if for any reason your premises do not comply with the minimum standards, you have to disclose that to the renter before they enter into the rental agreement. Also part of this, and again, as I said at the beginning, everything was starting as of today, but you will notice throughout the changes that a couple of things are a little bit further down the track. So they've given you some time as the rental provider to make adjustments within your property to make sure it's up to compliance standards. So as we work through this, you'll see a number of areas where there is a change in date, and this is a good example of it. As of the 31st of December this year, so you've got a few months ahead of you, if you have received a repair notice on your rental property in the last 3 years that relates to mould or damp that has been caused by or is related to the building structure, you need to disclose it. So this isn't about damp or mould within the property that's caused by the tenant having all the windows closed and hot showers going and no ventilation. This is, of course, if there's been rising damp, or there's a roof issue with some leakage through the roof tiles, etc. So whether or not it's something that you've received a repair notice on, therefore you should have moved ahead and made the repair and perhaps haven't yet. If that's the case and there's outstanding repair works, and because of that we have mould or damp within that building structure, you are required now under law to disclose that fact to the renter before they take up the rental agreement and move into the premises. Going back to what I just highlighted around the gas, electrical and compliance checks. So within these compliance checks, we have your gas, your electrical, all your appliances, and your pool barriers as well. Don't forget smoke alarms will be within this as well in terms of compliance, but you need to provide to the renter the date of the most recent compliance check. So moving forward, regardless of whether you actually have a renter in your property now, or you're looking to put a property onto the market to secure a renter, every rental property in Victoria is going to need these compliance checks. And the quicker you can get them done, the better, obviously, because then once they're there, they're on file, they are meeting the requirements, and then you can forget about them for 2 years. But every 2 years, you are going to be required to have these compliance checks done again. So it's about making sure that we are doing them regularly and that the property is kept up to the minimum standards with regard to that electrical, gas and pool safety. If there have been any outstanding recommendations in respect of these checks, so if we had a check done today, for instance, and our gas technician came back and said that there was an issue on area, it may not be an immediate repair, it may not be something that requires a safety repair done urgently, but it's a notation to say, look, this needs to be changed, or it's not quite where it needs to be in terms of compliance, or down the track we can see this becoming an issue. If there's a recommendation, again, you are required to disclose that to the renter, to let them know before they get into this property what those outstanding issues may be, and therefore how it may affect them going forward. Okay, a few more. Some of these are very easy. We need to let them know whether or not your premises is a registered place. So i.e. is it heritage listed? You would know that. We also need to let them know if there's been any contamination due to trafficking or cultivation of drugs in the last 5 years. So if you have got a property where perhaps prior to you buying it, you know that there were some drug activities within that property with regard to either trafficking out of there or cultivation of drugs within the property in the last 5 years, we must disclose that to the renter prior to them taking over the property and moving into the rental agreement. Again, asbestos. If you have asbestos in your property and it has been identified by inspection of a qualified person, so we've had a builder or a qualified asbestos technician out there, they've looked at the premises and they have notified you that there is a contamination, I beg your pardon, or some asbestos within the property, we need to let the renter know. Now, it may be perfectly safe to live there. Lots of older properties may have asbestos, and as we know, if you don't touch it, it can be fine. But we still have a duty of care to our renter to inform them that that is the case. You need to let your renter know if your premises is subject to building or planning application. So if you have bought the property and your intention is to develop it, but in the meantime, you are of course going to put in a renter and get a yield from that while you're making for your applications to go through, that is fine, but your renter needs to be aware of the fact that that is your intention. You must also, as I said before, disclose if you have engaged an agent or you intend to sell the property. Now, of course, if you've already engaged an agent, that's one thing. Intent to sell the property is immediate intent. I mean, who knows? You may put a renter in today, you have no intention of selling your rental property. However, down the track, your situation changes and you decide that you are going to deinvest that asset. At that point, we would serve the renter with notice to let them know. But if your intention is to sell or you've engaged an agent, then absolutely we must disclose that before the renter moves into the property and takes up the rental application, sorry, the rental agreement, so the tenancy agreement. Personally, my suggestion around this, of course, is when you're looking to sell your rental properties, it's going to be much easier to ensure that your sale and your property management all stay in-house, because your sale agent and your property manager are going to have to work very closely together under the new legislation to make sure, number one, the service of notice period is correct, to let the renter know that you intend to sell, and also to manage the open for inspections and also manage the compensation. So moving forward, thinking about what that might look like, it is going to be a lot easier if your selling agent is your managing agent. If not, for any reason, that's not the case, then you need to make sure that both of those agents or agencies are in regular communication to ensure that there's no breach of legislation with regard to this aspect. Last couple of ones here. It seems like a lot, I know, to disclose, but for you, it's going to be a one form. Noel Jones is going to provide the form with you. It's going to ask the questions and you are going to indicate whether yes or no is applicable. And then you are required to sign off on it to verify that information. I think it's important to note at this point that the onus always will come back to the residential rental provider. Your agent is the conduit between you and the renter, but the legal requirement to disclose information and to have your property at the minimum standards and comply with all of these new rules comes back down to you as the rental provider. It's your asset, it's your property. So the last couple are fairly straightforward. If you are part of an owner's corporation, so again, you've got apartments or property that's on strata title, you must provide information if your premises is subject to a building dispute or a current OC dispute, so if there's something going on. And also you are required to provide a copy of the OC rules to your renter. So again, they understand how the property transacts and whether it will affect their enjoyment of the property once they live there. So understanding what those OC rules are, what the do's and don'ts are, will go a long way to making sure that you don't have any complaints from other people within the owner's corporation because your renter is not aware of what can and can't be done. So there are a number of disclosure requirements here, as you can see, and it is something which we're going to have to get used to. But the good news is it is all going to be done in a simple format for you to indicate yes or no. And if you're not sure, have that discussion with your Noel Jones property manager and they will advise you of any, I guess, additional information that's required or action that you might need to take to ensure that you are disclosing correctly. So we're going to look at the minimum rental standards. So this is quite a lot, guys. So buckle up, ready to go. There are a number of things to talk about here. Again, I want to stress that most of these standards will apply when your new tenancies commence, or if you're on a fixed tenancy now, when they move to a periodic tenancy. There are a couple of things, which heating is one of them, that is going to be required to be looked at immediately, but most of them are saying going forward from this point. So we're not going back historically. Your renter can't now turn around and say, well, as of the 29th, this has changed, so I want my property brought up to the minimum standard. If they're already in their property, they're already in the agreement, the lease agreement, the property is as is, unless the legislation specifies otherwise. So it will allow you to have some time to work on these minimum standards and do any works necessary within your property to ensure that if you get to the end of the tenancy or your fix runs into periodic, that your minimum standards will be met. So you are going to disclose them all in your disclosure requirements, as we've just talked about, so that's pretty standard. What you should understand going forward for you is if your rented property does not meet these minimum standards, your renter can issue a notice to terminate the rental agreement if they haven't entered into it and taken possession, or if they enter into the property and then find out after the fact, so your disclosure document says that everything is as it should be, you are happy that everything is at standard, your renter moves in and then finds that something does not meet the minimum standards, they can serve you a notice, and that notice would act as an urgent repair. So whichever way you look at it, you're going to have to do the works to get the standards correct. You either do them prior to your renters going in, or if your renter goes in and it's found to be below the minimum standard, you're going to have to effect that then as an urgent repair. So let's have a look at what they are. I've just highlighted them at the moment. Of course, there's a lot more detail around this. And again, I do know that your property managers at Noel Jones have some extensive documentation around this, so you can fully understand the requirements. I have just highlighted them because there's probably about 25, and I will talk to each one, and happy to take more questions at the end and give you more depth of information if you require. So the first thing we should look at is your smoke alarms. As we know, all properties are required to have smoke alarms. They can still be battery operated or hardwired. Obviously, with the new properties, it will be hardwired. And if they are hardwired electrical, they will form part of those safety checks. So every 2 years, that hardwiring of your smoke alarms will be checked along with all your other electrical appliances. Smoke alarms are required to be checked to ensure they are correctly installed, and they must be checked every 12 months. So there's a requirement to have those done. Again, from a logistical perspective, I would suggest that maybe you would be looking at a third party to come in and do that. That way they come in, they do the check, they warranty the work. And of course that will go to ensuring that you're compliant around your insurance as well as a landlord. because your insurance policies now are going to need to obviously reflect these minimum standards. And if you're not upholding the requirements under the Act, there may be an issue with a gap in your insurance if the work's not been done correctly. Again, that's something to have a conversation with your property manager and also your insurer. There is a requirement now around locks. So all external doors on your property that can be secured with a deadlock must have one fitted. So if there's the ability to fit a deadlock to an external door, it is now a legal requirement to have one. If, however, you cannot fit a deadlock, so it might be a sliding screen door, it might be a door that goes into common area and therefore could not have a deadlock on it, you can require to fit a lock to it, but not the deadlock. But if the property's doors allow deadlocks, so if they can be fitted, they must be. Rubbish bins. I'm sure most of you are already providing rubbish bins to your renters, but you now have a legal requirement to provide one rubbish and one recycle bin at the commencement of the rental agreement for the use of your renter. The bin needs to comply, of course, with council requirements for collection. So, of course, the fastest way to deal with this is to order those from your council. They will come in at the property, they will form part of the condition report, so it will be noted on the condition report when the renter goes in, and of course will be a requirement when the renter leaves that those bins are there, but it is now a legal requirement. Toilets. This seems quite straightforward, but they have now mandated the requirements around toilets, bathrooms, laundries, and what the legislation says is that your toilets must be in good working order and contained in a room that is intended to be a toilet. Highly unlikely, I think, that any of you are probably going to have outside toilets, but the requirement under law is that they are intended to be a toilet and not something that's been adapted to be one. So again, if you're not sure, talk to your property manager and they will advise you as to whether your toilets are compliant. Bathrooms, very similar. They must now contain a wash basin, a shower or a bath, and are required to be connected to a reasonable supply of hot and cold water. It's always difficult when the legislators use the word reasonable, because what does that mean? Effectively, the supply of water needs to be enough that they can run a wash basin, fill a bath and take a shower with a reasonable water pressure and not have to wait too long for, let's say, a bath to fill or a basin to fill. So within those normal parameters that you would expect in your own home. The exception to this, of course, is when we start to look at your plumbing. If you have a property that has old plumbing and that affects the supply of water, there may be some situations where the reasonable supply would be less, but that is something you'll need to have a discussion about and a measurement on what that looks like. Kitchens. Your kitchen must have a dedicated area. This area should be intended for preparation and cooking, so therefore some kind of bench where preparation can be done, and a cooktop with 2 or more burners. I know this sounds probably very obvious to all of you, but again, we're trying to get away, or the legislation's getting away from those rental providers who perhaps have a property that doesn't have a really good kitchen. The renters are cooking on some small one gas burner, some of them are even propane burners because they're not prepared to put the money into the property because perhaps there's going to be a demolition down the track. And this is really where the legislation is pushing towards, is a lot of those landlords, or maybe self-managed landlords, that have properties that are nowhere near the standard that we would expect. So for the majority of you, I would suggest toilets, bathrooms, kitchens, etc. will all meet the minimum standards. Laundry the same. So moving into our laundry. This, of course, if you've got a communal laundry, again, in apartments under an owners corporation, it's not yours, it belongs to the OC, therefore the onus is on them, not you. You can only be held responsible for the minimum standards under the Act that are in your property and you have some control over. Laundry, however, must be connected again to a reasonable supply of hot and cold water to make sure that the appliances can fill correctly. And again, these are one of those things whereby if you are providing laundry facilities, some of you may have washing machines in your properties that you allow your renters to use. If that breaks and you need to replace it, you will be required to replace it with an energy efficient appliance. And there's a standard under the Act for what energy efficient means. Structural soundness. This is a difficult one, I think, to apply, because as a property owner, if I'm not a structural engineer, how would I know that my property meets the structural soundness? And I guess the reality of that is, if you're not sure, you should get it inspected. But again, good property owners like yourselves moving forward with their assets are going to ensure that the property is well looked after, because that's what's giving you your yield, that's what's giving you a return, and ultimately that's what's building your portfolio and your business wealth under your assets. But the premises are required to be structurally sound and also weatherproof. So making sure that we pay particular attention to the weatherproof part. This, of course, then will roll on to what we just spoke about, or I just spoke about, which is mold and damp. Each room must be free from mold and damp that is caused or related to the building structure. So as I've already mentioned, if your property has damp or mold within it because your renter is not using the adequate ventilation, they're not turning on the fans, they're not opening the windows, obviously your property managers will raise this with them when they go and do routine inspections and ensure they understand the requirement for that. But for you as the rental provider, it's just your requirement to ensure that structurally the property is not causing mold or dampness in any of the rooms. Now, electrical safety. Again, this is quite a big ticket item, and for some of you, it may require you to have a financial investment in your property to upgrade your switchboards. I don't know what your properties are like, and again, I've seen some that are very compliant, people have had work done recently, others may need some work done to them. This will be picked up when you have those electrical checks done. So we just talked about the incoming electrical checks for gas safety, etc. So your electrician or the electrician that you decide to use will go and have a look, and they will let you know if your switchboards don't meet Australian compliance standards and what those standards are, and what action you will need to take to ensure they do. But under the Act, the requirement is now going to be as of the 29th of March 2023. So you've got a couple of years to look at this and put into place what's required to ensure that the electrical works is done correctly. But as of that point, 29th of March, so 2 years from today, all your power outlets and your lighting circuits must be connected to a switchboard type with a circuit breaker that complies with our Australian standards, and also a switchboard that has RCDs, so your residual current devices, which again are meeting Australian standards. So if for any reason your switchboards don't meet those requirements, you are going to need to look at that going forward and put a maintenance plan in to ensure that this time in 2 years that everything is electrically compliant. Okay, window coverings. This is another one which is attached to a certain time, so a time frame around this. This is going to be this time next year. So 29th of March 2022. So again, is giving you time to have the works done and allow that sort of grace period. But moving forward, with all these tenancies moving forward, you are going to be required as the rental provider to ensure that each window in a room that is likely to be used as a bedroom or a living area is fitted with a curtain or blind that can be opened and closed. So the onus on you as the rental provider is to ensure that when the renter goes in, there are curtains or blinds at these windows and they can be opened and closed, and they provide the required amount of privacy. So making sure the curtains themselves and the blinds fit correctly and allow privacy, and of course the limitation of light when required. If your renter decides down the track that they want to take down your window furnishings and put up their own, they can do that, but they need to store yours correctly and safely and ensure that they're not exposed to any kind of damp or damage. And of course, at the end of the agreement, when the renter moves out, they're required to reinstall those windows furnishings. But moving forward, it will be your requirement to ensure at the beginning of the tenancy that they are in place. Okay, a couple more. There are a few of these, I'm sorry, but there's a few to go through. Windows, lighting and heating will wrap up our rental standards. So our windows, now we're looking at the actual windows themselves. Again, all external windows, so a bit like the external doors, all your external windows now for your rented premises that are capable of opening must be able to be set in an open or closed position. and must have a functioning latch to secure them against external entry. So we can no longer have windows that are painted shut. If they have the ability to open, they must be able to be opened and stay open or stay closed. So again, depending on the windows you have in your property will depend on whether or not there's maintenance requirements around that. However, all our windows must have an internal latch that can be secured to prevent the window from being opened externally. Now that can be a latch, it can be a bolt, it can be whatever suits the window, but it must be something that allows the renter to lock the window internally, which prevents the window from being opened externally. There is also now going to be a requirement around the lighting within your properties. And this is about your interior rooms, your corridors, your hallways, etc. And there is a requirement to have access to adequate light for the function of the room. So depending on what the room is will depend on the adequate light that is considered to be applicable for the functionality of that room. It can be artificial. So of course it can be your normal lights, your down lights or additional lights in there, or it can be natural, or it can be what we call borrowed light. So obviously if you have a room whereby light comes in from another room, so from a window or a skylight or something, and it is considered to give enough adequate light to that room itself for its function, that is fine, but it must be an appropriate amount. So I guess worst case scenario, maybe if you've got older properties, they're dimly lit, you may be looking at putting in some brighter globes, you may need some more downlights, you may need to have something in there whereby we're adding adequate light for something like a corridor to prevent slipping or any kind of accident happening because we can't see the footing correctly. And again, this is probably more likely to be applicable to an older property, I would assume. Again, your property managers will be able to go through the property with you, do an audit and let you know whether or not they believe there's additional requirements in those particular rooms. And last but not least, on the minimum standards, and I'm not going to apologise because I know there's a lot of them, but I think it's important for you to understand what those key areas are going to be, because this will be a lot of your conversation, I believe, going forward with your property managers as to whether or not you meet the minimum standard. Heating. It is a requirement that there's a fixed heater, so it cannot be portable. It cannot be something which was intended to be portable or movable and then you fix it to a wall. It must have been purchased as a heater that was designed to be fitted and hung on the wall. It can of course be plugged in, but it needs to be wall mounted. It must be in good working order and it needs to be in the main living area of the premises. So this is a requirement from today moving forward. All properties must have a fixed heater in their main living area. If your heater, so if you've got heaters in your properties now and they were installed prior to the 29th, they still need to be fixed to the wall. So if you are for some reason offering a heating source within your rented property that is not fixed, you will need to look at now putting in a fixed heater. If, however, you have a fixed heater in that main living area, and it's all compliant, it's fine. You don't need to do anything with it. However, if you don't have one and you're now thinking, great, I'm going to need to put a heater in here, the requirement as of today moving forward is that you have to put in an energy efficient one. And again, the legislation mandates what energy efficient is, and it also mandates what a fixed heater is. And your property managers can give you more detail around that. But in short, if you have a fixed heater in your property now, nothing for you to do at the moment. 2023, it will need to be efficient. If you don't have a heater in your property and you intend to put one in the next week, 10 days, 2 weeks, etc., it must be an energy efficient one that you fit moving forward. So this is one of those things that I said right at the beginning that has come into play now. So this is for all properties. Okay, that's our minimum standards. Just going to quickly touch on the safety checks and a couple of other aspects before we wrap up, because it's nearly 8 o'clock already. And I know there'll be some questions, I'm sure, which hopefully myself and the property management team at Noel Jones can assist you with. So with regard to the safety checks, as I said before, this is going to be a 2-yearly requirement, and we are going to make sure that all our electrical and gas installations on the premises are checked correctly. It must be carried out by a licensed or registered electrician or gas fitter. Obviously, if you are one of those, so you can do it yourself, that is something which of course you can do, but you have to have all the licenses and requirements around that and be able to issue the correct compliance certificates to ensure that they're on file, because going back to what I spoke about 10 minutes ago, you know that's going to form part now of your disclosure under the Act to your renter moving in. You are required to provide date and evidence. So this is your evidence of these checks in writing to the renter if they request them. So if you've disclosed it at the beginning and you say, yes, I've got one, the renter is allowed to, of course, ask for proof of that so they can understand what that looked like, what was checked. And of course, if there were any recommendations made, right at the beginning, we talked about this under the disclosure document, they have a right to understand what those recommendations are and to ask you as the rental provider to ensure those recommendations are carried out. So if your electrical and gas safety checks have not been completed within the last 2 years, on the day that your renter occupies the premises, so if they go in, disclosure document, you've said, no, we haven't had it done, the renter chooses to, of course, take up the rental agreement and move in, you are then required to organise those as soon as is practically possible. And they will be basically treated like an urgent repair. We've told the renter that we haven't had the 2 yearly check done. They've accepted that, we've disclosed it, they've gone into the rental agreement knowing that, but once they go into that rental agreement, then you are, as a provider, the onus is back on you to now have that check done as quickly as is practical. So again, as I said right at the beginning, this is something you want to get done, have it on file because you're going to need it at some point in the very near future. So even if you haven't had it done before your renter takes the premises, you're then going to have to do it as an urgent repair thereafter. So it needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. This is the other one that I touched on a little bit earlier, and I would really like to just again go through with you quite quickly. I understand there's a lot of content here, and there's also, of course, a lot of other changes that are going to be made under this Act and these regulations. And again, your property managers will take you through the things that I haven't touched upon. But modifications is another big one. This is the understanding that your renter can make some modifications without your consent. So they do not need to ask you about this. They can just go ahead and do it. And I've listed them here, and they're generally very minor. Picture hooks and screws, if you want to put in a wall mount, a shelf or a bracket. Now, the without consent modifications are where it is done on a wall that is not exposed brick or concrete. So some kind of dry lined wall, the usual walls you have within a property. But if they want to drill in or to hang something on exposed brick or concrete, they are required to ask your consent. Because obviously the damage that could be caused or the repercussions that may be caused by doing that is something which you need to understand, and there needs to be an adjustment around that as to whether or not we consent to it, whether there's likely to be lasting damage to the property, and whether or not it can be rectified at the end of the rental agreement. So when you look at all of these, think about anything other than exposed brick or concrete walls. So picture hooks, screws, shelves, brackets, any kind of wall anchoring devices can be put in there. So that might be something like holding a bookcase back to the wall. So maybe they want to put a bracket on each side to make sure the bookcase can't be pulled over by a child or something like that. Hardware that's mounted on the walls for safety gates for children. So I'm sure you're all aware of the safety gates whereby you put the hardware on the wall, screw it in, and then the safety gate will fit onto it. They can be done without your consent. LED light globes, so obviously where they want to change the light globes in the property, they can do that. They need to keep your globes and replace them at the end of the tenancy. They can, of course, look at changing things like water efficient shower heads. So if you do not have a water efficient shower head in your property, your shower head is working fine, there's no issue, there's no requirement for you to change that. If, however, your renter would prefer to have a water efficient one, they can fit their own, but they must retain your one and put it back in at the end of the tenancy. So a lot of these modifications, if they are removing something, they must retain it and of course return it at the end of the tenancy. And this will be noted, of course, on your condition reports going in, and any modifications that are changed will be picked up in your inspections. So as your routine inspections are done, and of course in the exiting condition report by your property manager. Your renter can include things like installation of blind or cord anchors. So where they have a blind and they want to put the anchor on the wall, they can put that in. They can install security lights, alarms or cameras, as long as they do not impact on the privacy of your neighbours, and they cannot be hardwired. So they could go to Bunnings and get a security camera, which is a plug-in, for instance, and put that in, mount that on the wall where they want it. It's not hardwired, so again, they do not have to request your permission for that, but they have to be mindful that it does not impact on the privacy of the neighbours. Otherwise, we could ask them to remove it. They are also allowed to add non-permanent window films. So they can put on that block out film to either block out or insulate the property if they wish to do so. It must be something that is non-permanent. They would not be able to have the windows tinted or changed without, of course, your permission, if you were happy for them to do that, and that would stay with the property after the tenancy, but they can put in a non-permanent window film. They can attach things like wireless doorbells. Again, that's something which can be taken down quite easily. As I mentioned earlier, they can replace your curtains, your window coverings, which are now mandated. If they do replace them with their own for the duration of the tenancy, they are required at the end to reinstall the ones which you had in the premises at the beginning. And of course, the storage of those window blinds, fittings, furnishings must be done in such a way that they are not damaged. They are allowed to add adhesive child locks to doors and drawers. So any of those adhesive locks that stop small children from pulling over drawers or doors. Same way as they might want to put on some kind of protection on the end of a bench top to stop a child walking into them. They can do all of those small modifications without your consent. They can also use the pressure mounted safety gates. So whereby we're not attaching them to the wall, we just screw them out and they pressure on. They can use those. And also put a lock on the letterbox if they wish to do so. So again, while it seems like there are a lot maybe of modifications, they're all minor. And I would ask you to always keep in mind that whatever modification your renter does, there is a requirement at the end of the tenancy to return it to the same condition as they received it in at the beginning. And there is, of course, the requirement there, if that's not done, that you can, as always, call on the bond for that. And now a little bit of good news. I want to end up with some good news for you as rental providers, because you're probably thinking this is a lot of the onus on you. I want to talk about professional cleaning for your premises. I know that a lot of rental providers get frustrated when the tenants move out and the property has not been cleaned to the standard that you would wish it to be. So we now have some legal requirements around this, which is going to be great for you as the rental provider, because the legislation says that if we want to get it back in the best condition, we need to start off with it in the best condition. So we cannot ask for a property to be professionally cleaned or brought up to that standard of professional cleaning unless we can prove that it was professionally cleaned before the renter went in. So the good news for everybody, I think, going forward as a rental provider is all you really need to do is at the commencement of your next tenancy, make sure that you have the property professionally cleaned and that is an itemised invoice. So it shows what you've had done, the costs incurred for doing it, and it will be attached to the condition report at the beginning of the tenancy. So we have stipulated, we've had the carpets cleaned, we've had the windows cleaned, whatever's been done to the property. So now when the tenant exits, you are able to ask them or enforce for them to have the property cleaned to the same standard. But if you have not had that professional cleaning from day one, you cannot ask for it when they leave the premises. So it's going to be a bit of a waterfall effect for you. If you get it done once, tenant comes in, when they leave, they need to have it professionally cleaned. We would have a copy of that invoice to show what the tenant did. That will then form part of the condition report for the next incoming renter. So again, we've told them, we've disclosed that the property has been professionally cleaned, and therefore there is a requirement at the end of the rental agreement for it to be cleaned to the same standard. This hopefully, well, this will definitely eliminate the frustration for you as the property owner when your tenants don't clean to the standard you would expect. The only change to this, if we don't have that professional cleaning done at the beginning, we get to the end, the tenant, or sorry, the renter will clean to what they consider is the correct standard. If, however, the only way to get the property back to its original condition is to have professional cleaning, then you would be able to force that point. So if we've got really stained carpets, if we can prove on the incoming condition report versus the outgoing that the carpets were immaculate coming in and now you've cleaned them as a renter to what you believe is an acceptable standard, but it clearly isn't, then we can enforce professional cleaning. But in my opinion, the best way to handle this and the best way for you to ensure your properties are kept at a good standard and are cleaned regularly, professionally, is to get it done once. Ingoing tenancy, have it cleaned, attach it to the condition reports, and therefore when that renter leaves, there's a requirement for them to have it cleaned at the same standard. So I think that's a little bit of good news, hopefully, in all of these changes. And last but not least, to just sort of wrap up a little bit here, so I know you're going to have some questions and Christy will jump in for those. Your property managers will work with you to identify what needs to happen now to ensure that your property is compliant. And I'm sure they're already having conversations with you around that and have been for a number of months. But each of your property managers will work with you to identify what needs to happen now if you are in a fixed tenancy, if anything, what needs to happen if your tenancy is coming to an end and you'll be then looking to put in a new renter. Or of course, if you have a property that is empty at the moment and is actively looking for a renter, are we going to make sure that we tick off on all those requirements before we move into a new rental agreement? I have popped in here for you the link to Consumer Affairs. There's a significant amount of information now on Consumer Affairs with regard to this, as you would expect. There's a lot of information for you as the rental provider and what you need to do and your requirements, and also information for the renter and their responsibilities also. So a good resource for you along with your property management team. So I'll stop talking now. I know it's been a lot of information. Hopefully it's been helpful for you, and I'll pass back to Christy, who I'm sure will have some information to give you and also take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I've actually collated the questions that have been coming through from everyone and just popped them into the chat for you. So I can get started on asking you them if you'd like. Question 1, there was just a question. I think this was from one of the earlier slides, the smooth and compliant management of your properties, just querying what that was referring to. Sorry, you're off mute.
Unmute me. Am I back? See, just like to switch me off. Great. So I guess what I was referring to here is, because today is D-Day and everything from now going forward is going to change, I think it's important to understand that we do have some time to transition things, and that your property manager there at Noel Jones are already primed, ready to work with you, so that there aren't massive changes or that your rental providers feel overwhelmed with things that need to be done. I know, having spoken to you, Christy, you've got an army of people sitting behind you, as well as third-party providers that are going to be able to make sure that we smoothly move and efficiently, not only financially, but also in sort of downtime for properties, transition into these new requirements without impacting the rental provider and the income and yield on their properties, is, I guess, where I was going with that.
Perfect, thank you. The next question was querying if the rule was that you didn't have to give a reason if you weren't renewing the lease after the first 12 months, and whether or not that can still be done.
No, so the 120-day no reason has gone. So the 120-day notice that we used to be able to give has gone. I know, and there are a number still of reasons that can be used. So if perhaps the rental provider is moving back into the premises, if they're selling the premises. So there are different notices now that we can give. And if we're wanting to end a fixed term tenancy, we now have the option only to do that at the end of the first fixed term. So if we're getting to the end of our first fixed term, we're intending to move back into the premises or perhaps wanting to sell it, we have notices we can give. But if we run past that first fixed term, we have a limit then to the reasons that we can use to get your renter out or to ask them to vacate the premises as we move into another fixed term. And I'm sure, Christy, I believe your property managers have a list of these notices and what they will mean to your clients, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And just to clarify there, what happens if the residential rental provider's circumstances do change and can't move forward with that? The reason, say it was for demolition purposes and then that didn't go ahead, how would that be handled?
Yep. So you, as we have now, you as the agent for your rental provider have reasons that we can issue a notice. Our renters now have the ability to reissue back to us as well. So if we give them notice to say that we wish for you to vacate the property because of demolition, for instance, or we're moving back in, they have what we call, it's almost like a right of reply now for some of these. So you've given me notice, so I'm going to give you notice to say that you want me out in 30 days. I'm happy, but I'm going to give you a 14-day notice to the end of the fixed term. I don't have all of them up in front of me, so I don't want to rattle off the dates and the times in case I'm incorrect. I don't have them memorized, unfortunately, for all of them. But if the circumstances change, that will become a negotiation between you and your renter. If they're happy to stay, you revoke the notice and they're happy, great. But maybe if they have accepted the notice and they've already complied and have found somewhere else, then obviously you can't make them come back into that tenancy, which would be the way it is now, Christy. It would be an awful lot different, would it, from what you have now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just point out, we do have quite a few questions here. So if we don't get to everything, I have copied everything down, and we will circulate that information when we send out the webinar tomorrow. So
yes, certainly you and I can work on that, Christy.
That. I might just choose a couple of other questions here that came through. Let's have a look. Regarding selling your property, if we're obligated to compensate, or the residential rental provider, is there an obligation on the tenants to permit access for selling? I think you covered off slightly on this earlier, and yes, there is.
Yeah. So the same thing would apply. We do have to give notice to obviously access the property for open for inspection. So we have to serve the appropriate notice period to say to the renter that we wish to come in. And as it always has been, the best way, of course, when you're selling your rental property is to work with your renter and agree with them. You know, we would really like to have an open for inspection, let's say on a Wednesday evening at 5 o'clock. And we'd also really love to have one at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. Are these the best times for you? So does that work with you? We still have to notify them at the beginning of the campaign. That's what we're going to do. But if we can get their agreement in advance, then obviously the issuing of the notices becomes a formality. But the requirement still is that you issue the renter with a notice to say that you want to gain access. They can refuse that if it's not suitable for them, the timing's not correct. But then, you know, we then go to a different notice period, and you don't want that prolonged time of having to argue with your renter about coming into the premises. So I would suggest that the most effective way is at the beginning of the sale process. And this is why I say, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, keeping your sale and your management in-house with the same agency is going to be imperative here to getting a smooth transition, because you want your sales team to be working with your property management team, who are working with your renter, to make sure the access periods are allowed and it'll be smooth for the campaign. But we are going to be limited to 2 open for inspections a week, and they can be no more than 1 hour at any given time. So, of course, the understanding for you as a rental providers is you're going to be doing 2 sets of compensation every week throughout the campaign. At minimum, that's going to be $60 a week. And, of course, if you have a rental property that has a higher rental amount, it could be as much as, I don't know, $150, $200 a week, depending on your rental. Again, Christy, I'm pretty sure that you've got a spreadsheet that shows the rental amount and what the compensation would look like for any given property amount. Is that correct? I'm sure we've seen that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just another couple of questions here to take us up to 8:15 when we're scheduled. And again, we'll come back with any of the others that we haven't got to. We've just got a couple of questions here about the process of the bond moving forward. There's some changes there. If you could just quickly run us through those.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, and this only applies to new tenancies. So again, I had a question today from somebody where they said, well, our renters approached us today and said that at the moment we're holding a 5-week bond for them, and under the new legislation, because of the amount that they're paying, really 4 weeks is all they need to pay. And I'll just go into a little bit more detail in a second. And what they were looking to do was try and pull back some of their bond. You can't touch it. It's from an existing rental agreement. They went into it, they paid the bond accordingly, so they cannot do anything on a bond that is sitting there now that's already applied against a rental property. So that's the first thing to know. Going forward, we had a situation, or still do, where we have a threshold for how much bond that we can claim on a property. It used to be $350. So if your premises was, $350 a week as a threshold, then you were only entitled to claim, so up to 350, a 4-week bond, basically, or the equivalent of a 4-week bond. If the rental amount was higher, then you were able to claim a larger bond because of the value, if you like, of the asset of the property. The important thing to understand is the threshold has changed. So 350 has now gone up to 900. So you're going to have properties that are bringing in more than $900 a week if you are looking to hold a bond higher than that standardized 4 weeks. Now, with regard to the bond process, it remains the same. The renter must pay it before they come into the property. They must, of course, when they exit the property, the condition report needs to make sure the premise is returned in good condition, giving fair wear and tear. This is where the cleaning is going to come in and really help your rental providers to ensure the standard of the property is coming back well. And of course, the bond is sitting there and cannot be released until we have exited the property and made sure the condition report reflects it correctly. There is going to be a slight change on the rental bonds and in terms of how they're claimed. I don't know if you want me to get into that now, Christy, but it's a little bit more complicated around the tenant have the ability to commence the refund process and how that works with the agency. Did you want me to touch on that? Is that something you want to talk to your clients about independently?
Yeah, I think it's probably something that our property managers can cover off. But I will just segue into one of our other questions in regards to the requirements that tenants can do themselves. For example, if a tenant wishes to paint the property, and how the process would go in terms of increasing the bond to cover any changes.
Great question. So
back.
Yeah, great question. So when we talked about modifications, remember that it's very prescribed what they can do without your consent. And I've summarised everything that the Act says can be done without consent. So if your renter comes to you and says they want to paint the lounge room, they don't like the white colour that it is at the moment and they want to change it to grey, for instance, they are going to have to request consent. Now, you are not able to withhold consent or reasonably hold consent, but if the renter is making a change to the premises, so for instance, they are painting a room or 2 rooms or a whole story of the house, you might say, well, okay, in order to change this back at the end of the tenancy, so to rectify it, we would want to have that done by a professional tradesperson. So therefore, our bond needs to be increased to ensure that if you move out and you don't repaint the property correctly, or it's not done to the correct standard, that we have the ability to use the bond to claim that money back to then have a tradesperson come in to do it. So the modifications without consent are very prescribed. The modifications with consent, there are situations where it be deemed to be reasonable to withhold. If you've got a brand new house, the property's just been built, it's brand new, and your renter comes in and says, yeah, I love it, it's all brand new, but I want to paint it all, it would be reasonable, I would believe, to withhold consent. It's a brand new property, and it would be detrimental and very expensive to be able to have that repainted and return it back at the end of the tenancy. I guess what I would say about all of these is, remember, they're untested yet. So until we get situations where a renter and a rental provider go to VCAT or the agents go to VCAT about these types of things, we get to know what the standard of reasonable consent or refusal is going to be. But anything that impacts your property in a way that financially is going to cost a lot to put it back to how it was, it would be reasonable to expect that you could ask for a larger bond amount to cover that in case your renter did not rectify it effectively at the end of the tenancy. Okay. So there is the ability there, absolutely, for the rental providers to do that.
Thank you. We might just finish off with a couple of questions. There was a few smaller questions in regards to heating. Is reverse cycle air conditioning okay for heating?
Fine, yeah. And again, just to do really quickly on that, Christy, there are specified within the Act, and again, your property management team have those all listed. Obviously tonight, I don't really have time to go through every compliant or non-compliant, but in answer to your question, yes, absolutely, that's fine. And again, if you talk to your property managers there at Noel Jones, they will have a list of the things that are considered to be compliant for fixed heating.
Perfect. And our final question, there was actually I think 3 of these came through just in regards to asbestos. A couple of the people watching tonight would like to just know what is their obligation there. Do they need to have that investigated? What would be the process around if they're unsure of having asbestos at the property?
Yeah, look, I'm a great believer that if you're not sure, knowledge is power. So at the end of the day, if you have an inkling or you have a concern that your property might have asbestos, remember with the disclosure statement, what we don't know, we don't know. So if on the disclosure statement it says, are you aware of asbestos in the property? And you're like, well, I'm not aware, I don't know. So I'm going to say no, because that's correct. I don't know there's anything there. But I would suggest, as the owner of a rental property, which again is your asset, you know, that is going to be something which is building you wealth. I look at rental properties as a business. You are running a small business and you need to look at your, you know, return on your investment, and all businesses require input of money to make money come out the other end. So if I was concerned about it, I would absolutely have a check done, just so that I would have peace of mind and I would know that legally I'm disclosing correctly. But if you don't think your property's got asbestos and you're not concerned about it, you may decide you don't want to go ahead and have those sort of checks done. And again, Christy, I defer back to you. I know that you've got lots of partners on board for safety checks and gas checks and smoke alarms and pool barriers. I'm sure there's probably somewhere in your sphere of influence, you maybe have people that can do these at a fixed cost just to ascertain what's there. But in my understanding, I'm not a qualified builder, but my understanding, of course, is with some asbestos, depending on what it is, it poses no danger as long as you leave it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone has any concerns or would like to go down that avenue, reach out to your property manager and we can get that ball rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Qualified advice on that is absolutely recommended.
I think we're just going to wrap things up now, and I'm going to pass back to Daniel.
Well, thank you, Christy, and of course, Catherine, for all of that valuable information. But I do know, ladies and gents, it's probably a lot to take in, and we'd love to have you out in person. Current circumstances, we felt that was a bit too risky, as we've seen what's occurred in Brisbane today, to try and arrange a venue, etc. Perhaps down the track we will be able to do this in person and actually meet you properly. But I do want to thank you for attending. Please, the questions that we haven't had the opportunity to answer, I think it's about 27 or 28 questions still sitting there unanswered. They will be addressed, and we will get that out to you and circulated as quickly as possible in the next 24 to 48 hours. However, if there is anything specific that your property manager at Noel Jones or one of our directors, you're welcome to reach out to one of the directors of your respective offices, myself included. Please do reach out. It is some trying times. We'll navigate our way through this together, and we'll ensure that we keep both you, your property, and your assets safe. And that's all we can, I guess, promise to do for you. And we do hope that you have a lovely evening. Again, thank you, Catherine, for all of the information, Christy for putting it together, and thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Have a wonderful night.